Okay, so we have an eye on the screen. I don't know what that is, but so are we going to see the candidates when they're speaking? I hope. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
I would
whoever
just put
speaks,
yourself on a
the video
gallery
goes
view.
to them.
All right. Somehow I don't know how to put on gallery view, but
By the way, is my
So
my
for
audio?
anyone at home, if
There we
you
go.
go to the upper right-hand corner, you can switch from, I believe it's called panelist view to gallery view. And the gallery view allows you to see everyone at the same time.
Yeah, I'm on. It says gallery view, so I'm seeing you right now. Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm a staff member at Southside Pride, and Southside Pride is likes to get involved in the politics in South Minneapolis, and we've agreed in this unusual time to do this Zoom debate. So I'd just like to read a couple words from one of my favorite thinkers of my generation, Arundhati Roy, who wrote about this epidemic we're having. So if you want to just, she said that this virus has struck hardest thus far in the richest, most powerful nations of the world, bringing the engines of capitalism to a juddering halt. The mandarins who are managing this pandemic are fond of speaking of it as a war, but if it really were a war, then who would be better prepared than the United States? If it were not masks and gloves that its frontline soldiers needed, but guns, smart bombs, fighter jets, and nuclear bombs, then would there really be a shortage? Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next, and we can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our databanks, our dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us, or we can walk through it lightly with a little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So the rules of this debate is that we're going to have 3-minute opening statements first. Senator Hayden has won the virtual towing costs and has opted to go second in the opening statements and then go last in the closing statements. And after that, we will have questions. Questions were sent in by numerous people, mostly delegates, over the last 2-3 weeks. And our staff here has gone through the questions, wordsmithed them, merged ones that were essentially on the same topics. And most of the topics were on the current crisis. And so a lot of the questions will be related to that and related to the issues in our district. Minutes each for each question. If we get through all of the pre-questions quickly, we'll take some additional questions that came in late after we went through these. So we'll start out first with the challenger, Omar Fatah, first with your opening statement. The timekeeper will notify people when you're getting close to the end. So go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dave. I appreciate that. My name is Omar Fateh. I want to first say thank you to everybody that's listening today. Thank you for you, Dave, and Southside Pride for organizing this debate, and Senator Hayden for also joining us today. My name is Omar Fatah, or Fateh, they both work. Fatah is the way of saying it in Somali. Fateh is the American way of saying it, I guess. I'm running for State Senate in District 62. I'm running as a Democratic Socialist, seeking the DFL endorsement. I'm a renter. I'm a former youth worker. I'm a community activist as well. as a renter, I've seen the effects of our skyrocketing rent increases and the impacts it's had on our communities, especially our communities of color. As a former youth worker, I've seen that our public education system has failed our students, and specifically our students of color, students that look like me. Because of that, I want to make sure that in terms of rent and housing, that we enact rent control by lifting the preemption on our cities and municipalities, but also making sure that we have a renter's bill of rights that protects renters from evictions, and also make sure that renters are not kicked out in the dead of winter as well. On the education side, I want to make sure that we have a fully funded public education system, fully funding our special needs programs specifically, and protecting our teachers and our ESPs, our hourly workers as well. And I want to make sure that we also have a fully funded public education from early childhood all the way to 2- and 4-year colleges. And that includes vocational schools as well, schools that provide skills that no matter how much technology advances, that will always be needed, such as HVAC and plumbing and things like that. A little bit about my platform is I'm running on a $15 an hour statewide minimum wage. I'm running on zero fare public transit, making sure that we have truly public transit that's free for everyone to ride, and making sure that we increase the affordable housing units in our district. So I want to thank you all for coming out and listening in on this debate today. And I hope to earn your support. And I'll be dropping my information off at the end of this debate as well.
Thank you. Senator Hayden?
Good. Well, thank you again, Dave and Eddie and the Southside Pride. I've known you guys for many years, and I'm so happy to be here and have this conversation. I want to say thank you to Mr. Fattah and others that are making this happen. My name is Jeff Hayden, and I am the current senator in Senate District 62. I've been in the legislature for 12 years. 3 of them I had the pleasure of representing the B side, and now this is my 9th session my 9th session as a senator. Every session I say is different, and this one surely is. We're dealing with this issue of COVID-19 that I know we're going to talk a lot about it. It was something that we couldn't anticipate, but it is all consuming. This is a district that is probably the most diverse district in the state. I argue a little bit with some of my friends to the east and west of me. But it also has, it spans from houses that are $400,000 and $500,000 on Minnehaha Creek to communities like East Phillips and Little Earth that are very low income. So I want to make sure that as we deal with this issue of COVID-19, it is going to affect our community in a way that is going to be devastating, especially if we don't get the information out, and we certainly don't get the resources. So we're working awfully hard today, right now, almost each and every day, to ensure that we have not only the beds and the capacity if people do fall ill, but get the information that we need in all languages and all communities and in the faith communities to ensure that people know what are the things that they need to do in order not to infect themselves or to transmit this to others. I also just want to make sure that people know that I've been a long advocate on economic development issues. One of my proudest achievements is working with Senator Champion and passing a bill that has now put $100 million in communities like ours, and among African Americans, Somali, Native, and Latino communities that did things like create business opportunities. The Midtown Exchange in our district and the Mercado are recipients of these dollars. There are lots of job training programs, and also people that the school system has not worked for them. It's giving them an opportunity to get adult basic education. I also am really proud of being assistant majority leader when I was in the majority, and now the assistant minority leader to help be in the leadership to lead this response to not only the things that we need to do in the legislature to deal with COVID, but also things like fighting for $100 million rental assistance package. We have a moratorium. I don't know, somehow the screen is moving. I'm not sure what's going on. They're telling me I got 15 seconds. So I guess what I said is that there's $100 million bill that we have that not only will deal with the actual issue of the rental assistance component of it,
Time's up,
or
Senator.
the eviction, but also the rental assistance. I'm sorry, it was a little disjointed, so sorry that I paused and hesitated.
Thank you, Senator Hayden. Mr. Fatah? Oh, that was the opening
I
statement.
gave my introduction.
Excuse
Yes.
me.
No problem.
Sounded a lot like the answer to the first question, which is
Coronavirus has had a disproportionate effect on communities in poverty and people of color, which includes our district. What do you believe are the reasons for this disparity? And Mr. Fatah will go first.
For sure. So what are the reasons for this disparity is what the question was?
Yes.
For sure, for sure. What do we know? We know that people of color, immigrants, indigenous folks that represent our district work in the front lines of these industries, that they are the most at risk to being exposed to this virus. That's number one. Number two, once infected, they're folks that, or potentially being infected, they're folks that are less likely to have a space to self-isolate or self-quarantine. Then that's due to wealth inequality. They don't have a guest room to go into. They are more likely to infect family members, siblings, parents, so on. They're more likely to be housing insecure. They're more likely to be renters. And they're folks that just move around a lot. What else do we know? We know that people of color are also less likely to have emergency savings. They're folks that, whether if they will have to make a decision between spending on food or rents, household stuff for their kids, and deciding between that and going to see a doctor, they're going to spend on the necessities first. So they're not well equipped to deal with this crisis, and they've been left behind. So there's inequality in terms of wealth, inequality in terms of the healthcare and the biases in the healthcare system. And there's a lot, I think, that can be done that has not been done or addressed by the crisis bill as well.
Thank you. Senator Hayden?
Well, we know that there is health disparities. Unfortunately, in Minnesota, we lead in disparities. I like to sometimes call it the land of 10,000 disparities. And health disparities is certainly the issue. We know what we know about the disease is that it is lethal, especially if you have a pre-existing condition. And so in our community and communities of color, they often have pre-existing conditions, things like asthma, things like chronic heart failure, or congestive heart failure, things like stage 4 kidney failure, which leads you to dialysis. We all know people and family members that have these issues. And so we know that if you get the disease and you have an underlying issue, that it is definitely going to be lethal, or certainly you'll have to be hospitalized. So with those health disparities and the lack of information, and this is something we just had a call, our 4th call with ethnic media in the governor's office to get the coronavirus fund into our communities, into the faith communities, into the ethnic media, to ensure that people know what are the proper, what I would call physical distancing. We don't want people to socially distance. We want to talk and have this conversation. But we do know that in our district, that is predominantly people of color, that the issue of the coronavirus getting into their system is a lot more lethal than in wealthy communities. And age is a factor of it as well. So what we have to do is to make sure that the dollars that we've appropriated in the legislature are targeted in our communities. And that's the fight that we're having each and every day, that I'm leading with my friends in the PLCI caucus to ensure, as well as that I'm a lead in the Health and Human Service. So we're on the front lines each and every day trying to direct those funds into our community.
Thank you. And the next question is, given this knowledge and your understanding of the disparities and the reasons for them, what should be the state's response? What needs to be done at the legislature that is not currently being addressed? And Senator Hayden, you can start.
Well, the first thing that we can do is make sure that the $500 million in which we've appropriated that proportionately that money is targeted in communities of color or communities that have health disparities. So once again, we have a process, and I won't take all my time going through it, but there are 3 different coronavirus funds, if you will, and we are making sure and fighting. I've had a conversation directly with the governor yesterday to deploy those dollars into our community, not only to deliver health care, not only to our FQHCs, but also in our media outlets and our community and faith-based organizations to keep people healthy. Things like working with the churches and the mosques to deliver food that is culturally appropriate and relevant for them. Making sure that people that they trust are having a conversation with them on I always, people say social distancing, but in communities of color, we want to stay social. We want to physically distance. So we need to be able to have folks to be able to talk to our communities, and that needs to be resourced. And that's the fight that we're having literally every single day that we're working on this issue.
Mr. Fattal?
No, thank you. And so the crisis bill has been recently passed, and since then, a lot of folks, specifically within our district, has reached out to our campaign about that. They've been ESPs, immigrants, dreamers, talking about what it has lacked and how they have been left behind. So what do we know? That number one, there's no guaranteed pay for our hourly workers in our public schools, such as our ESPs. Number two, it literally does nothing in terms of rent or providing housing assistance for residents. Number three, it has not provided any guaranteed income for folks that do not qualify for unemployment insurance. And what do I mean by that? I mean by students that are recent graduates, students that will be graduating in May. Number four, it has not done anything about our dreamers, protecting our undocumented residents. And our district does have a large number of folks that fall under that category. It has not provided hazard pay for our workers and providing more protections for our workers. Finally, I think that the biggest issue that we've seen is that we have a federal government that provided a relief or a freeze on federal student loan payments and also an interest freeze, but we haven't gotten that at the state level. And in a district like ours, where we have a large number of undocumented folks, that greatly impacts them because number one, they don't qualify for the federal student loans. So they're heavily reliant or solely reliant on the state aid. On top of that, they aren't qualifying for the federal assistance. And on top of that, they're not receiving any help from our state. They're being left out. So that, yes, we have a long way to go in terms of providing real relief to folks in our district specifically.
Thank you. So the next question is, we've seen Republicans across Minnesota make unsupported statements about Governor Walz's stay-at-home order. For example, Senate Majority Leader Paul Gazelka was quoted in the Star Tribune as saying it was time for Minnesotans to get back to work. How do you view these statements and how would you respond to them? And Mr. Fidel, you can go first on this one.
Oh yeah, well, I think that's just blatantly irresponsible. What we're seeing is that wealthy investors telling us to get back to work, to restart the economy, quote unquote, putting shareholder and corporate profits over our people. That's immoral. I think that's wrong. Putting people back to work, and we know this, puts more people at risk, especially communities of color, especially folks in our district. Putting them at risk to exposure. In doing so, we'll have more fatalities. We will overwhelm our healthcare system. So I think that's not the way to go at all. I think that we need to continue to flatten the curve and listen to our governor, Tim Walz, and staying home, making sure that we're distancing ourselves from people, making sure that we're only leaving home for essential needs, and making sure that we're listening to our public health officials, that we need to make sure that we need to come back to normalcy when they deem that it's safe to do otherwise.
Senator?
Well, I want to refer people that I also agree that Senator Gazelka, Abler, Senator Hoffman, and Senator Dr. Jensen are very reckless in their approach to this. To that extent, myself and Senator, and also doctor in the hospital, Dr. Klein, wrote an op-ed to that in the Star and Tribune. So we have actually published a retort to that to say that it doesn't follow the science, that it puts people in jeopardy, and that it is selfish, that it is reckless. So I am on the record each and every day letting them know. As a matter of fact, the last day before the legislature went into their kind of shelter in place, as a lead on the committee, I asked my committee members not to show up to a hearing that pretty much didn't have anything that was pressing, to ensure that we didn't continue to expose ourselves or to spread the virus to people. So I pretty much walk the talk on this issue. I've had conversations with those in the GOP directly as I can, to tell them how reckless and foolish and how they're putting people at risk.
Thank you. The COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare the fact that many of our systems have not been responsive to the needs of the people in our district.
With your election, what kinds of broader economic and political change would you advocate for? And Senator, you can take that.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Well, I really appreciate the question today. As we speak today, we are fighting to make sure that the dollars that we have go to helping people. So right now, we are fighting with the Republicans to have this $100 million fund for rental assistance. The way that the legislature is designed today in this COVID-19 is that all four leaders, our caucuses, have to agree along with the governor. So we are fighting, but we are a little hamstrung. Sometimes it can work to an advantage, but we're a little hamstrung if one caucus doesn't want to do it. So right now we're working as our lead Senator Disick on a package along with the House, the leadership in the House, for a $100 million package. Moving forward, I'd like to expand that work that I've already done, that I referred with Senator Champion, the $100 million that has gone into an equity fund for small business and job training. In addition to that, we have bills that are creating pathways for young people to go to college by waiving some of the issues with FAFSA. We know in other states we've increased college participation in communities of color by 68% by just removing the barrier of FAFSA for them. We also have a bill right now that is pending the legislature, that if you're a person that is in foster care and you graduate to the streets, that you have free college, that tuition is waived. And also really, really pushing hard to lower tuition at the University of Minnesota and at the Minnesota State system. So those are just some of the things that we're working on in order to create an environment that equals the playing field for all Minnesotans.
Thank you. Mr. Fidel?
Well,
Excuse me.
no problem, but I answered the question also previously.
The question, the pandemic has laid bare the fact.
Oh, sorry. Yes, can you repeat that question? I apologize.
The pandemic has laid bare the fact that many of the systems are not responsive to the needs of the people. With your election, what kinds of broader economic and political change would you advocate for?
Well, I've always been an advocate for protecting our workers and advocating for our workers. And I think what we've seen right now, given this pandemic, is that folks that have been traditionally attacked as not needing a livable wage or deemed as dispensable have been now known to be deserving much more, right? What does that look like? We have a system that healthcare is tied to employment. I think that's wrong. I think we should move towards a universal healthcare system that's not tied to employment, especially given the fact that we've seen a pandemic right now where workers have just been laid off, and disproportionately folks that are representing our district. We have a stay-at-home order, which I fully support, but for folks in our district, a lot of people lack permanent housing. There's no home to stay at. So I think that we need to think about what it looks like promoting more affordable housing units within our district and making sure we're filling that gap between folks that are homeless and folks that are not able to afford the most affordable housing unit. I've seen a study where close to 70 to 75% of our homeless population actually do have a job. And I think that's also very troubling to find that out. We need to raise the minimum wage to a $15 an hour statewide, making sure that we are also in the time of crisis providing hazard pay to our essential workers, to our transit workers, to our grocery store folks, to our nurses, making sure that we have union protected work jobs for everybody, making sure that these unions can protect them, especially in this situation in a time of crisis. And it is my opinion that workers should not be taking the hit right now. It should be the CEOs. So we should be doing everything to protect our residents, our workers, our essential workers, folks that make up our district.
Thank you. The next question is, how would you center historically oppressed people, such as Indigenous, Black, and people of color, IBPOC, in your work as an elected official? What's your plan to empower IBPOC? And Mr. Fattah, you're first on this question. No,
thank you for that. I think just in my time as an activist, working with diverse communities dealing with different issues such as mental health, dealing with addiction, connecting to communities that have traditionally been not listened to. That's the Latinx population, our Indigenous folks. Going around Little Earth, residents have told me that the senator has not been there since the last election. I find that to be wrong and immoral. We shouldn't cut off an entire segment of our population that who we're staying on their land. They were here before us. And I think that we should make sure that we are making sure we are making decisions based off of those in our communities. What do we know? We know that folks of color are less likely to have generational wealth. For example, tying this to education, we're the second worst state in serving our students of color. Why is that? How do we address that? Making sure that we have teachers that look like the students that they're servicing, right? Making sure that we have universal childcare to couple that with zero fare public transit to make sure that folks are able to, number one, be more mobile and access opportunities without needing a car. A large part of our district does not own a car. Making sure that folks are able to leave their house knowing their kids are safe. So that's how universal childcare would tie into that. Making sure that they have a livable wage, making sure that everybody is listened to, especially on the A side. I'm a resident of Phillips, and this is an area I think with Little Earth that has been the most neglected by our senator and by our leadership. So I think that there's a lot that has to be done. And I think with my ties to the communities, to our diverse communities, with diverse interests, but at the same time, the same unmet need, a lot has to be done.
Senator?
So I find it interesting that Mr. Fattah continues to talk about my not working on the A side. I'll just say that's where my mother and my grandfather were raised, and I've spent almost my entire life on the A side. As a matter of fact, I just introduced a $20 million bonding bill that works with almost every organization in the Native American and Indigenous community in order to expand. If it's the NACD Clinic and the work that they do, that's money that we've already appropriated for the American Indian Center, the Indian, in almost every a group that's there, I'm in close contact with. As a matter of fact, I just talked to an activist just 2 weeks ago at Little Earth, in which they were having their laundromat services reduced significantly, which was causing great pain. So we worked with the city of Minneapolis to expand that. So I'm not sure who Mr. Fattah is talking to, or if he's talking to a particular person, but the work that we're doing on the A side is really a big deal. In addition to that, I helped to find and appropriate $300,000 to the EPNI group that's working on environmental justice, that is fighting the city on increasing heavy industrial use there. And they have a plan to mitigate that damage in the city, not to totally tear down a lot of the things in which they built up there. So I'm working with former Representative Clark and other Indigenous folks in the East Phillips neighborhood. So I've kind of put my money where my mouth is, or the state's money where my mouth is on that issue. So I want us to be careful in terms of our accusations about where we work in the district. I work all over the district. And so to your question, those are the kind of things literally that we've done all over this district. all over the state in order to work to enhance the lives of people of color. As an African American person myself, I know that I've gone through a school system that often didn't have me prepared, and I had to do a lot of work to get in the position that I am now. So I want to make a better and a much better life for everybody. And I work hard to be inclusive of all who are in our district, especially people of color, in particular African Americans, East Africans, and certainly people in our indigenous our community who I work really hard for.
Thank you. The next question is specifically about affordable housing. How would you change the current model of assessing and providing affordable housing, if at all?
Is that question for Senator Hayden first?
That Senator Hayden is first, yes.
Oh, okay. I didn't know who was first.
Yeah.
Well,
sorry.
We're
Going back and forth, so.
First of all, in our bonding bill, we have hundreds of $millions proposed to create new affordable housing, as well as money in order to work on our public housing infrastructure. I'll never forget when we were deliberating the stadium, which I didn't vote for. Just about the amount of money that we spent on the stadium was the amount of money that we needed in deferred maintenance of public housing. So we have a long ways to go. But from a state's perspective, we are certainly developing in our caucus and in the House leadership a bonding bill that will address these issues, as well as working with the state to create this natural, affordable public our housing to make sure that we're not losing it. We're working closely with the city and the county to get them the necessary resources and language in which to do so. And then my big call is that developers have to put some skin in the game. Either we need more nonprofit developers that drive down the cost of this, or we're going to have to do more inclusionary zoning and more preemption to create more units of affordable housing so that folks can afford to live. The very folks who work in this district can live there.
Mr. Fadal? Fatah?
Fate.
I'm sorry, my mind is going.
No,
See
no.
when you get old, I guess.
No problem. So there's it's all right. There's a list of things we can do. Number one, I think we need to end statewide preemption on rent control in our cities. A majority, for example, of our city council, they support rent cancellation in this time of crisis for the COVID-19 response, but they cannot enact it because of the state. So if we were able to do that, we would have been able to support rent cancellation, but also for a greater conversation in the future, I think rent control would be possible. Number two, we need to move away from how affordable housing is calculated and move towards more income-based housing, meaning based off of your ability to pay. I think that's something that our residents are greatly lacking here in 62. We need to preserve and protect our public housing that we have in our district. We have several high rises. So I think making sure that, and this is something that a lot of the elders have mentioned, anytime that there is any dollars coming in or partnerships to renovate, that there's no privatization involved. I think folks are really worried about that as well. And finally, I want to make sure that we have a renter bill of rights so that we can protect our renters and put the power in the hands of our renters. What does that look like? Providing renters protection from being evicted in the dead of winter, families, making sure that landlords give a significant notice prior to eviction. We need rental history reform so that folks are not discriminated against based off of their rental history, which folks of color and low-income folks are disproportionately affected by. And just holding landlords more accountable also to their lease, just like renters are expected to honor their lease. I think landlords should also do that in terms of home fixes, fixing pipe damages, making sure that mice are out of the apartment units and things like that. I think we also need to hold our landlords accountable as well.
Okay, and you're going to be first on the next question, which is about affordable public transit, which is of great concern within Senate District 62 as well as statewide. Can you discuss public policy ideas surrounding public transit and share your legislative transportation goals?
Absolutely, and thank you for that question. I think that's one of the key parts of my platform. I'm advocating for and fighting for zero fare public transit. I believe that we should have zero fare public transit touching each corner of our state. Having some of having some of the poorest neighborhoods, and some of the in neighborhoods that are low income and immigrant neighborhoods. I think having folks being able to access opportunity without needing a car is critical to not just the success of our district, but critical for folks to be able to live their everyday lives, folks that don't have a car. Making sure that also with that, it's better for the environment with less cars off of the road. And with that, we can have a more pedestrian, biker-friendly district and state as well. I also want to see us transition to fully electric bus fleets as well as statewide vehicles. Doing that alone will do wonders for our environment. It'll have zero tailpipe pollution from our buses, and also just for our emergency vehicles and our police vehicles, transitioning to 100% electric is a goal that I also want to push for as well.
Thank you. Senator Hayden?
Good. Well, thank you for that question. You know, we have been fighting for the D line and the B line. We need $20 million from the state in order to complete the D line. And we know that that is an important corridor that takes you all the way from Brooklyn Park to the Mall of America through North and South Minneapolis, where many people live and work. So we know that having transit oriented strategies and bus rapid transit really works for people. We also, when you hear at the legislature, people talk about roads and bridges. Often they don't talk about transit. And transit funding and our ability to put more money into transit funding not only could get us potentially to a free transit line, but it certainly can lower the fares. And I've been working closely with my good friend Scott Dibble and Frank Hornstein, who have been the chairs and respected leads on this issue, about creating an environment and where transit really reigns supreme, and that we can get out of our cars. We know that not only can everybody not afford a car, but it also is probably becoming our number one environmental concern is what comes out of the tailpipes. As someone who grew up on this 35W trench as a child at my grandmother's house and today lives towards it, it suffers from asthma. It's probably no coincidence why we have some of these chronic diseases. So I think that as we continue, if we can hold the House and we can flip the Senate, I think we have a governor that is ready to help us be able to create a much more transit friendly system to certainly lower the cost of the fare box, if not eliminate it at all, and create an infrastructure that works for all.
Thank you. And you will be first on the next question, which is about public education. How will you ensure that the state legislature passes budget and policy bills that ensure excellent public education statewide? In your opinion, how can we build an equitable policy solutions?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. You know, there was this constitutional amendment that tried to define equality without any backing it up. It was driven by big business, the Chamber of Commerce, the Minnesota Business Partnership, and I told them no. Senator Champion and I looked them in the face, Neil Kashkari and others, and even Alan Page, who's a hero to a lot of us, and we told them that that's not the way. And with that, they came after me. And sometimes you have to have the courage to look people in the face and tell them no. Here's what we should do. We should fully fund schools. Our schools aren't fully funded. We should ensure that the cross-subsidy for special education, which is a mandate by the federal government, that schools are getting fully funded for that. We should add more teachers of color. So about 4 years ago, I had a bill that took education support specialists and put them on a curriculum at no cost to them and allowed them to become teachers. 68% of those graduates were people of color, right? So Senator Patricia Torres Reyes, along with a coalition of us, have a bill to add more teachers of color. And then the last thing I will say, and there are others that we could do, well, full service schools, I can't leave that out. Our school board member Nelson Inns really has spearheaded that. We have that at Green Central. That means we do a collaborative approach to it, wraparound services to schools. And then I don't want to forget about curriculum. We need to look at our curriculum and make sure our curriculum is culturally appropriate and relevant and gets kids excited to want to learn. we know that kids of color and in particular African American kids are being left behind. And with those strategies, I believe that we can slow down or even eradicate the achievement gap.
Mr. Fatah.
No, thank you. And so we have to start with what we know. The state constitution right now guarantees uniform access to a uniform public education system. And that's something that we're just not seeing right now. How do we achieve that? We must first fully fund our public education system, especially, and make sure that we're not just reliant on property taxes. And that's where a lot of the disparity comes from. Making sure that we fully fund our special education programs. Having a sister that grew up with special needs and seeing her bounce between different schools, I think is important that we make sure that we fully fund our public education system and specifically our special needs program so that we're better servicing all of our students. Making sure that, and this ties to what happens right now during the coronavirus, make sure that we have universal broadband for all of our students so that students are able to do homework and learn in a system where technology is more rapidly being more utilized. Right now, with schools being shut down, we've seen students being forced to learn from home. So I think that having universal broadband statewide will be beneficial, especially for students of color. Finally, I want to see that we have a free, publicly funded education from early childhood all the way to 2 and 4 year colleges. And what does that look like? Making sure that we have universal childcare, making sure we have fully funded early childhood education. Every study shows that when a child has quality early childhood education, that they're much more successful later on in life. Make sure that we achieve that. Making sure that not only 2 and 4 year colleges, but we have students have access to vocational programs, the trades, like I said before, HVAC and plumbing, jobs that are union protected jobs that are good paying jobs as well, that can help specifically folks within our district.
Thank you. The next question is about healthcare. Rising healthcare costs are increasingly burdensome and unaffordable for many of our district residents. What legislative action needs to be taken to ensure Minnesotans have access to affordable, high-quality insurance and healthcare? And Mr. Fatah, you're first on this.
No, thank you for that. And I think that what I want to see and what our residents want to see is us moving towards a universal healthcare system, and not one that is not a healthcare system that is tied to employment. I support Senator John Marty's plan for a single healthcare system that also tackles dental and vision. But I think that we shouldn't go with premiums. We should replace them with taxes that are based off of your ability to pay. With healthcare, we should also have a second part to that, dealing with addiction, which is something that greatly impacts specifically our district at a disproportionate rate. We should provide more addiction services, making sure that addiction is treated as a public health issue and not as a criminal issue, which also disproportionately targets people of color, folks within our district. And we need rehabilitation for those who need it most, and also be respectful of our indigenous population that have talked to me about the possibility and the need of culturally sensitive rehabilitation practices. They believe in more traditional methods of healing. And any way we can help support that, I would like to be a fighter for that as well. But we also need to help move towards systems of more harm reduction, for example, making sure that we're providing safe injection sites, needle exchanges, and just making sure that we're a more rehabilitative state, not a state that criminalizes or stigmatizes addiction.
Thank you. Senator Hayden.
Good. Well, thank you. Senator Marty is one of my heroes and certainly one of my mentors. And when I got into the House, I was a co-author of the Minnesota Health Plan. And since I've been in the Senate, I've also been a co-author of the Minnesota Health Plan, which is often referred to as single payer. It's a little more comprehensive than that. The other thing that we have been working on is we have expanded Medicaid that I was a part of helping to craft. along with the Minnesota Care, which turned into the basic health plan for folks who are working, and then obviously the exchange, the ACA that you know. We have to do more. We have to be able to have Minnesotans opt into those plans. And so last year, the governor had an option and where people could go into Minnesota Care if their health care was unaffordable where they work, or if their networks were too narrow around the state. And so we've been pushing that issue. Republicans, of course, have been pushing back because they believe in making all the money off of healthcare. So I've been a long advocate of pushing issues that get us much closer to single payer healthcare, but certainly having the state help to subsidize healthcare. And just a note on the issue of mental health parity and addiction. Before I got in the legislature, I worked a lot on that issue with the county and in other groups. And as well as I'm really proud to say that my father started a culturally specific treatment center in 1976 called Turning Point. So as a child of an alcoholic, I certainly understand that. And my wife is also in the business. She's worked at Chrysalis Hazelton and now runs the LGBTQ Pride Center that works on this issue of addiction. So I'm steeped in this each and every day and understand this issue of parity with mental health and addiction along with physical health. And then I'll say a little bit about dental. We don't do enough that we should, and we've been fighting to get more money into dental for Medicare, get the rates so that we can get more people to be able to get and take care of their dental health. So in other words, creating a comprehensive system. So I'm excited once again that if we can retain the House and we can get in the Senate, that I can help to lead and craft a proposal that gives people more access, lower cost, and high quality. And then one day really work closely together with Senator Marty and the great minds of this state to create a single payer healthcare system.
Thank you. And Senator Hayden, you'll be first. The next question is about strategies you would like to implement to combat global warming and what stakeholders you would like to partner with to implement those strategies. And also someone on the chat asked about the criminalization of protest, which I think you may want to address as part of this question.
Yeah, well, certainly I don't believe in the criminalization of protest, not only on the environmental side, but I fought awfully hard against Nick Zerwas's bill when he was in the legislature that was giving people penalties when we were fighting against police brutality. So that is just a non-starter for me. And if any bill comes by my desk or if I can fight against that, I will. I'm looking forward to partnering with all of the environmentalists, including I just had a screening with MN350 and some of the work that they're doing to stop Line 3, right? But the other thing that I really want to do, and I've talked to this a lot to my environmentalist friends, is to broaden who's involved, is to get more people of color involved. The work that we're doing with EPNI in terms of the over-industrialization in East Phillips, really highlights that if we invest in our communities of color, they work really hard, they have designed, they've done the research, they have things that mitigate the damage. So we not only have to talk about it, we not only have to be philosophical about it because we know what happens to the earth if we're on the path, we have to invest in it. And those are the kind of things that I want to do, is build a broad-based coalition that includes people of color and do things like take state dollars and invest and local organizations and coalitions like EPNI to get this work done.
Mr. Fattah?
Yes, can you repeat that question again? Also, I apologize.
What strategies would you like to implement to combat global warming? What stakeholders would you partner with to implement those strategies? And what's your position on the criminalization of protests?
First, let me tackle the criminalization of protests. I would go against any legislation or any attempt to criminalize protesting at all. I think that's number one, that's fascist. Number two, that's un-American. It goes against our right to speak out, to assemble, to protest. I think number two, in terms of our combating global warming, I want to see us, while I do respect the legislative efforts to move towards 100% renewable energy by 2050, I think that it's much more urgent than that. We got to do it by 2030, right? And what does that look like? That looks like investing in an electric fleet of cars. That looks like providing green jobs in solar and wind technologies, jobs that are union jobs, jobs that are high paying, jobs that are multi-generational, that are long-term. We must stop line 3 and hold Enbridge accountable, and also just educating folks on environmental justice as well, and why it is a global effort. Historically, communities such as my community, the East African American community, they have just not been reached out to. And I think it's important, if you want to build a greater coalition to stop this, you need to engage everybody, right? I think Somalis specifically understand the need for this, but not in a way where it's tied to environmental justice, right? For example, our actions here are having great impacts in Somalia with the famine, with the drought, and making sure that they understand that actions over here, the way they're living their life, greatly influence or greatly impacts their families back home. And I think that making sure that we build a coalition of folks like MN350, who I also screened with, and I have great friends in, folks like Isaiah, but also folks that traditionally have been expected to care about or be boxed into their own issues. I think that we should fight for all issues, such as having housing folks come on board, having folks from the LGBT community come on board, having folks that believe in criminal justice reform come on board. So we're all fighting together in these efforts.
Thank you. What do you consider your greatest achievement thus far in public service? And what would be your priorities for the next session?
Well, I've been honored to work this past, I would say 18 months or so, or 2 years with forming a group with young East African women dealing with both addiction as well as mental health issues that have both been stigmatized within our community. What we did was we connected with elders within the community to talk about this issue, and our elected officials had community listening sessions. I helped partner with our friends and indigenous siblings over at Little Earth to learn more about how they tackled, how they're dealing with these issues, and for example, how they are teaching their youth how to use Narcan, for example. We've had several sessions in this. I think we've had Representative Horan Hassan help out. We've had Mahmoud Noor help out. We've had Commissioner Angela Conley and so on come out. But time and time again, after these folks have reached out, both from the indigenous side and the East African side, to Senator Hayden, they have not gotten any responses. They felt neglected and they felt not listened to. And I think that's wrong. We need a senator that's a champion and fighting alongside of both Representative Horan Hassan, as well as Aisha Gomez. And we have a unique opportunity to have a three-headed warrior, or a three-headed monster in the Senate district. Number two, I think that my two top priorities would be lifting preemption so that Minneapolis City Council has more ability to pass housing reform. And that includes rent control. Right now, we're seeing, like I said before, a city council that's willing to enact rent cancellation, but they can't do so because of the state in this current health crisis. Finally, I want to see student debt cancellation at the state level, and this will greatly help our undocumented siblings the most, who rely solely on state loans to help pay for their college. So I think that we have a lot more to do, but I want to make sure that we tackle both our housing crisis and our student loan crisis, but at the same time making sure that all communities are in this conversation and make sure that everyone is listened to. And right now, they're just feeling neglected.
Senator Hayden.
I'm not sure. Maybe you should repeat the question, because I thought that my good friend here, Mr. Patel, got a little off a point. I guess what I will say is,
what are your greatest achievements? What do you consider your greatest achievements in public service, and what are your priorities for the next legislative session?
Sure. Well, I'll go back to that equity bill that I told you about that has put a lot of money and effort and good policy. Once again, over $100 million. I partnered with my friends in order for people to be able to be entrepreneurs, get the job training that they look for, and also get the education that they want. I'm really proud of the work that I've done in East Phillips with Representative Clark. We created we got a pool funded there. We knew that Black and brown kids were the ones that were drowning. Along with Representative Clark's help, we were able to get the funds in order to create the East Phillips pool. I'm really proud of the work we're doing environmentally with the EPNI group there. I'm also really proud of some of the work we've done on tobacco and fighting big tobacco, in which they've targeted Black and brown communities, and we have started to not allow people to access menthol as much as they used to. They'd have to go to a tobacco shop, and then the T21. The other thing that I'm really proud of is the work that we did on marriage equality, and making sure that everybody, if you love each other, can be married. I noticed and doing some work with Mr. Fattah that he didn't support a lot of those issues, and there were some issues around curriculum with transgender people when he ran in Fairfax, Virginia, that he was pretty conservative on, and worked with the Republicans in order to block that. So I'm not quite sure if we start to talk about our records, if Mr. Fattah really wants to address those at another time. But the day in which we passed the law that everybody can be married was one of our proudest achievements in the legislature. So I've been in the legislature a good amount of time. There are a lot of things, a lot of bills that we've gotten done. My office is always open, and just by the mere fact of the amount of legislation that we've done on both the A and the B side suggests that the folks that Mr. Fattah are talking to maybe don't have it right, or certainly I think he has it wrong.
Thank you. So we're going to move to closing statements. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions that people sent in, but there were a couple things that I want you to include in your closing statements. One is, will you agree to not run against an endorsed candidate if there's an endorsement in the online endorsement process that happens over the next several weeks? And secondly, people have asked for an email that they can send into for each of you if they have more questions. So if you could include an answer to both of those in your closing statements, that would be great. And Mr. Fattah, you go first in your 3-minute closing statement.
First, I want to take a step back and respond to the allegation that the senator has laid out. That's 100% false. I know he got it from a right-wing website from my time in Virginia. I've always advocated for all students, including our LGBT students. I've always advocated for our LGBT siblings, and I even have a transgender person working on my staff right now, advising me, working closely with me to help shape my platform on my campaign. So that's completely false. So I'm going to shut that down right now. Number two, I want to make sure that I directly lay out that I will abide by the endorsement. But at the same time, we feel confident that we do have a supermajority, and I feel confident in getting that endorsement. Number three, I want to thank you, Dave, and Southside Pride for having us come out today and debate. I want to thank Senator Hayden also for being part of this, as well as everyone else for joining in and listening in on this conversation. I'm running because right now we have a senator that's just not representing all of our communities. And a lot of folks in our district feel neglected, specifically on the A side, my neighborhood of Phillips and our neighbors in Little Earth. I want to fight for example, a $15 an hour statewide minimum wage, which the senator has been on record in MinnPost saying that he is against. And Southside Pride has highlighted that as well. He can say that he has been a supporter of it, but I find it troubling that as a senator, the past 8 years, you can't find one post, one video, anything stating that the senator has supported a $15 an hour minimum wage. So that's very convenient in the election time. I'm running as a democratic socialist and not as a pragmatic progressive, as the senator stated in the Southside Pride Journal. I'm running to make sure that we're representing everybody, making sure that we have a working class agenda, fighting for universal health care, fighting for zero fare public transit. And we've built a strong coalition of folks, young folks, working class people, immigrants, LGBT folks, folks in every precinct of our district to build this campaign together. But I just want to say thank you all for joining us today. And if you have any other questions, we'll be providing my email. It is omar@omarfateh.org. And my phone number, if you need it, is 612-406-8816. My manager, Dawson, I believe is in this chat. He will also be putting in my phone number. We feel good about getting this endorsement on April 25th, but I'm going to need your help. I'm going to ask for your support, those of you that are delegates. And I'm always here if you need to reach out to me by email or by phone. So thank you all for being a part of this.
Thank you. Senator Hayden.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the Southside Pride, Dave, David, you, and Eddie, and all the others that are working to put this together. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about it. I feel really good about my accomplishments and the work that I've done in the legislature and the opportunity to do it in the future. I feel good about not only policies that have been changed, the work that we've done on healthcare, the work that we've done on economic development, the fight that we're putting up on education. We are going to win this endorsement, and I certainly will abide by it if for some reason we don't, because I think that's something you want us to talk about. I also want to just be really clear that my record is open and it's public. You can look at the bills that I had today and the bills going back for 12 years. That doesn't substantiate. Just because Mr. Fatah continues to say it doesn't mean that it's so. We work on both sides of this district as hard as possible. I don't care if it's on 38th Street to 46th Street to Franklin Avenue, from Little Earth to Sabathani and every school in between. We have worked, I have worked, my team has worked to make sure that we have a district that is inclusive. Our office is always open. We answer our emails. I learned a long time ago when I was an aide and I worked for Gary Schiff that constituent services is the lifeblood of the work that we do here. So I want to ask you for your support. It is time that we flip the Senate. It is time that we retain the House. It is time that you have the leadership that can get things done. That is, and I'm okay with being pragmatic because there are many people who are hungry. There are many people who need a roof over their head. There are many people who need health care. Those works and the work that I've been able to do with my partners at the legislature has allowed us to do it. So once again, I want to thank all of you for being there. I want you to thoroughly check out our record on these issues. I don't want you to take my word for it. All of those things can be found. You can find me at Jeffrey D. Hayden. That's my personal email, Jeffrey D. Hayden @gmail. I'll have my campaign folks put up my campaign email. And you can always get us at the Capitol. We are working day and night in order to deal with this pandemic and to make sure that the resources in this community is what we need to have. So once again, democracy sometimes is not the cleanest thing in the world. I want to thank Mr. Fatah and all the folks that are working for him for us to have this robust debate and discussion. I think it is really helpful for us to know and to have a strong position in the legislature. And once again, thank you guys for having me.
And thank you. So these emails and phone numbers and the link to the YouTube video of this debate will all be on the Southside Pride website at southsidepride.com. And this website will be available all through the voting for the convention. So tell your friends that they can watch the debate. And thank you very much for tuning in. And tell people that they can watch it on YouTube. And that's it.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. So,
Thank you, Dave.
okay, we can turn it off now, whoever has the button.
All right, I've got it. Thank you very much, David, and the Southside team and everybody that helped put this together. We'll
Okay.
get this recording clipped.